before I ask you about deterrent and punishment, we just heard the prosecutor say that this is a distraction. Are these issues that people are talking about, do you find, is this something people should care about, or is this just a distraction, do you think?
Well, this is the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees that people will not suffer when they're punished. So he might think it's a distraction, but really it's a very important constitutional matter. It's at the forefront of sentencing these days. So no, it's certainly not a distraction.
Well, go ahead, Grant, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it's a matter of transparency, whether you think it's appropriate or not. As far as the death penalty, if we're going to strap somebody to the table and kill them, we should make sure we're doing it right. And that's what this is about. Make sure we're doing it right.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the research you guys have been involved with going back to deterrent or punishment. Is that evolved? Has that changed over time? I take the prosecutor at his word whatever he says, but in terms of research across the country, what have you found?
So if you look back to around the 1700s where our laws come from over in England, back then 222 crimes were eligible for the death penalty. Everything from killing someone to cutting down your neighbor's tree. But the difference was that there was no police force, no constables, nothing investigating. It was left to victims, their family and friends and neighbors to investigate crimes and then bring that forward for prosecution. So basically they were saying, we probably can't catch you ourselves, but if we do catch you, we're going to kill you. And so it might have been a deterrent back then. But then once we see at the exact same time pretty much that the Crown over in England creates a police force, they slash the amount of death penalty offenses, which kind of correlates to the fact that if we're going to ramp up investigations and create the ability to catch you, then we no longer need as much of the death penalty.
So how has it changed in our modern era? Is it evolving now, and how is it used now?
Well, it really spiked many years ago. Then we saw a real drop-off in the number of people who were executed. And we're beginning to see those numbers go back up again as this method of execution is being, the whole matter is being settled, and states are finding different cocktails or drugs that they can use to execute people. I do want to briefly go back to deterrence because it relates to a project we're working on at our law school right now. Something can't be a deterrent if it's not used in a manner that people can expect a certain outcome. So in order for a punishment to act as a deterrent, it must be certain. And there's no real certainty as to who gets the death penalty and who doesn't. It's almost arbitrary in its application. There are some minimal standards for applying for a death penalty on a case, but those vary so much just between a county and another county, a prosecutor and another prosecutor.
I thought our laws were supposed to do away with a lot of that discretion.
Right.
They're 40 some odd years ago.
This is really an area where discretion determines whether someone gets life or death. You saw Bob McCullough. His office is very active in seeking the death penalty. Right next to St. Louis County is St. Louis City, where Jennifer Joyce hardly ever requests the death penalty on a case. These are two cities that abut each other, but are complete opposite when it comes to seeking the death penalty for criminal defendants.
Are states starting to pull this off the table? I know in Illinois we no longer have a death penalty.
Yeah. The states are starting to pull it off the table because they're starting to realize that we're getting it wrong. And when you're talking about the death penalty, it's the one judgment that once you kill somebody and execute them, we can't go back. There's no saying, oops, we're sorry. So they're pulling it off the table because they realize that they're wrong. I mean, since 1976, we've had 144 exonerations from death row, 3 from Missouri. I mean, that's 3 too many and 144 too many. You can't have the margin of error.
I know a lot of people would point out there are a lot of appeals. I know the family, for instance, I would never try to speak for them. The Halls, who were down there just over 24 hours ago, spent 25 years waiting for what they felt was justice. 25 years isn't enough time to figure out these problems and any possible sentencing?
Well, I mean, that is the problem. There were problems. That's why it took so long. You know, when you have a death penalty appeal, it costs at least 3 times as much as a regular death penalty case. The appeals drag out for a long time because they need to, because if we're going to execute somebody, we need to be absolutely certain that the fairest measure of justice was given, that there weren't mistakes with the evidence, that there was a full investigation. If you were to take the death penalty off the table, if this was a case where Mr. Ferguson would have been given life without parole, this would have been over years and years ago. He still wouldn't have ever gotten out of prison, and we would have saved a lot of Missouri taxpayer money.
You've kind of touched a little bit on it, and I've kind of been alluding to some of the research you've done, but at the same time, less than 24 hours ago, we also got an announcement from St. Louis University about some research you're doing. Tell me, can you kind of explain it and tell me why, and why you feel it's necessary?
Sure, we're starting a Missouri Proportionality Review Project. Over the last 20 years, the Missouri Supreme Court has been gathering data about murder-first cases and about death penalty cases. And that data's all been kept almost literally in boxes at the Missouri Supreme Court. What we want to know from looking at these records is, when was the death penalty used? When was it not used? Who got life? Who got death? There should be some consistency, Casey. We should see, as we talked about, certain results when certain factors are fed in. That's the way that our justice system should work. So our projects, with the help of our students, are going to go back and say, let's look at the crime, let's look at the defendant, let's look at the evidence.
The race, the location.
Absolutely. Where do we see the consistencies we should see from a fair application of the death penalty across the state of Missouri?